What a crazy story, huh? What a crazy God story. And we're gonna look at another one here in our Bibles. So why don't you open your Bibles to the book of Ruth. If you don't know where the book of Ruth is, if you start at the beginning, there's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then Joshua, where we were in last week, Judges, and Ruth. So the book of Ruth. And I won't make you stand up again since we just had you sit down, but I'm going to read verses 1 through 5 of Ruth chapter 1. We're going to go through the entire book. We're not going to read every verse. I'd encourage you, maybe even this afternoon, to sit down with your family and read through the entire book of Ruth. There's only 4 chapters. It's a really cool story, but we'll cover a lot of the details this morning. So Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. There they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. This is the word of the Lord. Some of you may have walked in the room today feeling the weight of loss. The loss of maybe a loved one, the loss of a dream, maybe the loss of a marriage. Maybe you feel just the loss of hope in your life. Maybe you feel like Naomi, who's lost her husband, who's not near anyone that she knows in her land because she's moved away. She's lost both of her sons, and in a place that's difficult for a woman to be on their own in this time in the world. Maybe you've asked the question, God, do you see what's going on in my life? Are you aware? Have you forgotten me? Are you going to ever lift this heaviness that's in my heart that just kind of seems like it's being piled on and piled on and piled on? Maybe you feel that way. Maybe you resonated with parts of Emily's story. Loved ones, this book, the book of Ruth, is for you. If you know someone in your life that is feeling these ways, this book is for them. This book often can be seen as kind of like a sweet romance because there's a happy ending at the end, but it's not a romance that sits in between the book of Judges and 1 Samuel. This book has tears, loneliness, poverty. They immigrate to another land. There's grief. There's a crisis of faith. There's hurting. There's sorrow. There's being crushed by loss. There's the experience of because all this has happened, the future is just over. But it is a story of God's redeeming grace. And your life, believe it or not, is a story of God's redeeming grace. So we are going to look at 3 ways that we see in this passage that God renews hope. So number 1 is this: God's grace meets us in our bitter seasons. That's often the time when we don't think God's grace is even evident, in those bitter seasons, in the hard seasons. And just to give us context as we come to this text, there are some details that don't stick out to us if you're not maybe as familiar with the biblical account. It starts with, these are in the days when the judges ruled. Just leave your finger right there. Look back at the last verse of Judges, which is just the book before. So for some of you, it might be just looking at the left page. And this is what it says was happening at the days of the judges in verse 25 of Judges 21. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So at the beginning of this story, Naomi is living in a land with her husband that is experiencing crisis, chaos. There is moral and spiritual downfall for the entire nation. Maybe feel somewhat like our day and age. And we learn that there's a famine. Now, many of us have experienced hunger because we didn't eat breakfast and we want lunch. Maybe you fasted, so you experienced true hunger. Maybe you fasted for a couple of days, but I doubt anyone in the room has experienced famine, where you can't go to the store to buy food, you can't grow food, and people are just dying because there is no food. That's what's going on in this story. That's the depth of what's going on, and they decide to go to another land. So you think, yeah, if there's no food, we should go. If the jobs dry up in an area, we should go someplace else. That seems to make sense. But Moab is a place where in the past, 24,000 approximately Israelites died because they were seduced by the idolatry of Moabite women. 24,000. So God said, don't go to that land. Yet, Naomi goes to that land with her husband. When we feel desperate, sometimes we do desperate things. And for her, the bottom then drops out. Her husband dies. Her sons marry into the people that they're not supposed to be with, and then her sons die, leaving her with no provision, no hope, 10 years of sorrow wrapped up in just a few verses. Some of you know what that feels like. Pain stacked on pain. Loss stacked on loss. The waves just seem to keep coming. The salt water comes in. You're trying to catch your breath and cough it up, and then it just seems to come again. Listen. It's helpful and it's important for us to kind of park ourselves in stories like this because we can quickly run, because it's only 4 chapters. We can run to the end and see how it's going to turn out. Everything's good, but we need to see that God was at work right here in the midst of these verses. God was working, and God is working in you, because God wasn't done with Naomi and God isn't done with you. Grace often begins its deepest work right where we think everything is falling apart. I was talking with some friends recently who are experiencing a bunch of challenges in their life, and I've had other friends tell me that. When I've experienced a bunch of challenges in a row, they're like, you know what? God must be working because all this stuff is going on. You're like, what are you talking about? Feels like God's absent. No, God is present. Think about Emily's story. In the midst of the early part of her story, you could have been like, where is God? But we know the end of the story now. We see where God was working in all those things and moving his hand and doing miraculous things that shouldn't have happened in her life. And that's what happens with Naomi. She tells her daughters-in-law, if you're moving on in the story, and in verse 11, Naomi tells her daughters to go back. Don't come with me. You can't come with me. Even if I find you some sons-in-laws that could marry you, it's going to be some time before they grow up, and you just need to stay here. And one of them says, yeah, I'm going to stay. But then the other one, Ruth, Look at verse 16 and 17. Ruth says this. She says, do not urge me to leave or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Do you have friends like that? Have you experienced that? I love this about our church because I see this in our church. Like when someone is struggling, even when they're kind of like pushing away help, there's like these just friends that are just like, no, I'm going to keep showing up. Like you can shut the door. I'm just going to come in the back door. I'm going to come help. I'm going to keep helping. Like I just love this about you. Like you're just like a relentless. We're going to be together. And what happens here is Ruth really, She trusts God. She becomes, if this is a New Testament, she becomes a Christian. Basically, if this was a New Testament story, she comes and she follows God. She leaves her pagan past and says, I'm going to follow you, but I'm going to be relentless. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be loyal. What happens when someone does that in your life? They're reflecting Christ who came and humbled himself and came into the midst of our mess. I love that about you. And so she comes in, even though Naomi at some point in time is going to tell friends as they go back to her homeland because they have nothing. She tells people to don't call me by my name, call me bitter. Call me Mara. That's what it says in verse 20. You got to be feeling pretty low when you're like, yeah, stop using my name. Start referring to me by my circumstance. Have you felt that way? Have you felt like telling people that? She does what many of us can be tempted to do, like read our circumstances and not see God's purposes. But we have to understand this from chapter 1. When the providence of God feels heavy, it is never hopeless. When the providence of God feels heavy, it is never hopeless. That's why we need to be in regular fellowship with one another, because we need those around us, because when the heaviness comes, it oftentimes comes out of nowhere. We don't expect it. Honestly, if we did expect it, we would kind of try to avoid it, but it comes, and we need people to remind us of these truths. Like, no, God's working. It's not hopeless. I know it feels hopeless. I want to acknowledge the feelings. Don't gloss over the feelings. They're real. They're experiencing those things. But it's not hopeless because God's grace meets us in our bitter seasons. There's glimmers of hope that you can see. And there's a glimmer of hope right here at the end of chapter 1. Look at verse 22. So Naomi returned with Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. There's some hopefulness there. Like the last time she was in her land, like there was famine, nobody was eating, but there's a hopefulness. Something's going to happen. There's a little bit of hope there, and we need to see that hope. And friends, that's why we need to remind each other of the things that we see. Because when I'm feeling the pain, this is what I see. I just see all the stuff, and someone needs to tell me, hey, there's a hope. There's a gospel working. There's a God working in your life. I need to point that thing out. Don't hesitate. Don't ever feel like you need permission to point out the hope of the gospel in people's lives. Yes, we should take pause if we're going to bring correction to somebody. But when there's an opportunity where you see God working, be like, hey, I just want to point out to you, God's working right here in your life. I know that doesn't feel like it's a big thing, but I just want you to know God's working. Grace is on the move in the story, and grace is on the move even in your story. Now, the second way God's grace renews hope in this book is this: God's grace works behind the scenes in ordinary faithfulness. God's grace is working behind the scenes. So look at chapter 2. Look at verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, and after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Now we read that and we're like, yeah, there's some things there I really don't understand what that means. There's this thing that happens in the nation of Israel. The way that those who had less or who were poor were provided for is if you were a landowner and you had people work for you and they harvested in your fields, they were required to leave the edges of the field for the poor. You couldn't do it all the way to the edge. You couldn't harvest everything. There was just the expectation and the command to leave the edges. So she is like, I'm going to go harvest at the edges. What's she saying? Things are really hard and I'm going to go to work. Hopefully I'll have a paycheck and it'll be a safe place for me. Because that was a big deal for someone in her station. A foreign woman could easily be taken advantage of if there's not a male around, a brother, a father, someone to protect her. So she's kind of going into a dangerous place, but she's like, no, I got to go. I got to take this humble step Just ordinary faithfulness. Loved ones, God often does some of his most amazing, redeeming work in the mundane of everyday life. Like this story as we're reading, like there's no fireworks, there's no angels, there's no visions, no dramatic events. Just going to work. Just faithfulness. Faithfulness in the field of obedience. Because what she's going to do, gleaning was hard. I went to the grocery store yesterday with my daughter. That was easy. There were so many things we could pick from and put into our cart. Boom, done. Didn't have to grow it, didn't have to water it, just put it in my cart. But she goes and it's hard work. And then something happens. Look at verse 3. Chapter 2, so she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who in verse 1 we learned was a worthy man who is a relative of Naomi. So he's of the clan of Elimelech. She just happened in the midst of just everyday stuff. She just happened. Was that a coincidence? No. No. There are no such coincidences in God's economy. God is at work, providentially working, even when it doesn't make sense. He's weaving redemption through just the mundane things of life. And not only does she go to this place, just happens on Boaz's field, he notices her. This guy notices her. Look at verse 4. And this is the guy that notices her. It says, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, so to his employees, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Does that happen at your work? Yep, some of you work for Christian employers. Maybe it does happen, but like that's the kind of guy that's the boss. The thing that comes off of his lips first isn't encouragement about what you're doing or hey, here's the task of the day. No, it is, hey, we're going to acknowledge the Lord. May the Lord be with you. This is the kind of guy that Ruth encounters. He is a worthy man. And he treats her, if we were to read all the details, he treats her with kindness. He protects her. He provides for her. He honors her. He treats her with dignity. If we walk through all of the details, he tells her to stay close to his female employees, to his young women. In verse 8, it says that. She wants to make sure she's safe. He tells the guys that are working for him, you leave her alone. Leave her alone. Make sure she's taken care of. He had heard about her. He had heard about the fact that she had left her foreign land to come and care for her mother-in-law. And so he protects her. And then at the end of the day, we see like they have a meal. Look at verse 14. And at mealtime, Boaz says to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. You know, we got some charcuterie and we got some other things going on and some roasted grain that's happening. And he passed to her some roasted grain and she ate it until she was satisfied. And she had some left over. Meaning like she ate everything that was on her plate until she couldn't eat anymore. Some of us just experienced that at Thanksgiving. And you're like, I can find some room for some more. That's where she's at. She is full. And then this is what he does when he sends her on her way. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Verse 17, then she beat out what she had gleaned. So that's part of the harvesting process. And he gives her an ephah of grain that she had harvested. Like, you're like, I don't see that on any of the packages of things that I buy. I don't know what an ephah is. It's about 25 to 50 pounds of grain. this is 25 pounds of rice, just to kind of give you a perspective. So she had like 1 to 2 bags of this to go home. He doesn't just feed her. He's like, I want to make sure she is taken care of. Like, she's mundane of life. She just shows up at work and she goes home with 4 turkeys. Like, that's what it is. And then she comes home and she's a little tired from carrying this because she didn't put it in the back of her car. She didn't put it back on her donkey because she just had to walk home. And she comes and she just plops it down. And of course, her mother-in-law is just expecting to have just enough food, maybe for the day, for them to eat. And she's like, whoa, where did you go? Where were you? Where were you at? Like, how did this happen? Well, I just went to work and I met this guy. His name's Boaz. He seems really nice. Boaz? What do you mean, Boaz? She knew who Boaz was. Naomi knew who Boaz was. He's a redeemer. In verse 20, we learn, she said, this man is a close relative of ours. He's one of our redeemers. She gets what that means. She understands. For all those of us, we don't have that in our cultural context, but she understands that a redeemer, somebody can come and they can change everything. When the bottom falls out, they can purchase your land. They can help you restore your situation. At the beginning of the day, she's going to work and everything is still hard. God's grace is still working even when the waiting feels unbearable. Do you believe that, friends? Do you believe that? That's what's happening here. That's what's happening in the story. God's grace was working even when everything was unbearable, and then hope starts to happen. Friends, we learn from chapter 2 is God supplies all of our needs, sometimes through ordinary obedience, sometimes through the ordinary obedience of his people. God supplies all of our needs. He does. Many of you have experienced that. Many of you have been the blessing to do that. I sometimes get the blessing to do this. Like, someone in our church says, hey, I want to bless somebody else. I'm going to give you an envelope. There's some cash in it. Don't look in it. I want you to give it to so-and-so. And I just get all excited because I have no idea what's in there. And then I get to go give it to, hey, this is for you. And they're like, who gave it to you? And I'm like, Jesus loves you. Boom. Hey, how can I send a thank you? Do you know what was in here? I said, I have no idea what was in there. I just know God showed up in your life and I got to be a part of it. He supplies our needs. Friends, in light of that reality, like, stay in his field. The temptation when things get hard is to run someplace else, to stop showing up on Sunday mornings, to stop going to small group, to not return text, phone calls from your brothers and sisters in Christ. That's what the enemy wants you to do. God just wants you to stay in his field because only he can satisfy, and in his field it is safe. Now the story goes on. Like, the intensity starts to happen. Naomi is quite excited about what is happening here. She knows who Boaz is. She knows the status that he has. He's a kinsman redeemer. And so the story goes on, and this is what she tells her daughter-in-law. So look at chapter 3, verse 3. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. So at first it makes sense. Yeah, hey, when you go and you meet him, make sure you look nice, put on a little perfume, shave your armpits, all that kind of stuff. Make sure you do that. And then she says, go to the threshing floor, and do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. So that seems kind of normal. Just, let him finish his dinner before you go have a conversation with him. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Then you're kind of like, whoa, what is going on here? Mother-in-law, I know you're eager, but this feels a little inappropriate. It does. I mean, we don't exactly know, but yet, you feel it a little bit? Some of you are like, yeah, I'm single and I have family members that tell me to do this all the time. Like, I have to tell them, just no. But, so she does it. So she goes and does it. And if we read all the details, just to summarize it, he's shocked that it happens. You know, I don't know about you. You're asleep on the threshing where everybody's like working. It's dark at night. And then you wake up and there's somebody at your feet. Whoa. But Boaz, he is a righteous man. He doesn't take advantage of her. He's a man who's in authority. He owns some land, and he has people who work for him. He could take advantage of her, but he doesn't. He blesses her. He protects her purity. He guards her reputation. He promises her redemption. In the story, he tells her, well, okay, I know you're here, but we're going to make sure you're taken care of. But I want to make sure that when you leave here, make sure you leave here so other people don't see you. Because he knew he had the authority. There are plenty of landowners that they knew that would have women come and go. But he did it not for his reputation, but for hers. And he sends her away, and he assures her, I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. But it doesn't initially look like the way that you'd want, because you kind of think in that moment, he's going to say, yeah, let's get married tomorrow. Go tell your mother-in-law to show up. We're going to have a big party. No, he says this. Look at verse 12. He says, now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. I'm going to go talk to him, and if he's not willing to do it, I'll be your redeemer. Like it kind of lets the air out of the story. Like the story's moving. It's like God's working, God's working, God's working. You ever feel that way? Like God's working in my life. He's going to do this thing and he's going to do it. You go to open the door and there's like a brick wall there. Like, wait a second. Like, I know God is working. This is the way I want God to work. Have you ever done that? God is working. He is working. He absolutely is working. He's still working here. And she's assured God is working, and you can hold on to that truth. But he says, no, I'm going to make sure this is done the right way. We don't have to force this. We don't have to go around the rules. Certainly, we're not going to sin in this process. We want to honor God in it. And he promises her protection. And he gives her some more food. Bring the garment. Hold it out. And she held it out in verse 15, 6 measures. So like she's holding her garment. She doesn't have a backpack, so she just kind of holds it, and he fills it up, and she takes it back with her. He provides for her some more. Like, I just want you to know, I want to put an exclamation point. I'm providing for you, and everything's going to be okay. But now there's more waiting. Friends, here's a truth for us to know. Waiting is often God's classroom. I had a professor, Dr. Ian Duguid, say this. He said, while you are waiting, God is working. While you are waiting, God is working. God is working. There are different reasons why we have to wait. I don't have all the explanations, but God is working while we're waiting. Sometimes the waiting is necessary for the working to be done appropriately in our hearts for various reasons, or he's orchestrating other things. But in the darkest seasons, friends, God is often doing his brightest work behind the scenes when you don't know it. Grace works behind the scenes in ordinary faithfulness. And then there's another way that God renews hope. God's grace provides a redeemer who restores our future. Look at verse 1 of chapter 4. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So they start having a conversation. Now we need to understand some rules about being a redeemer in this context. To be a redeemer, some things had to be in play. One, you had to be a near kinsman, which means you needed to be a close relative. So not just anyone could do it. You had to be a close relative. Two, you had to have the ability to pay the price. So it wasn't something that someone was just immediately obligated to if they were close as a relative. They had to have the ability to do it. And thirdly, they had to be willing to do it. So just because they had it Just because they had the money, just because they're close, didn't obligate them to have to do it. How that points us to our Redeemer. Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us. He came near. He lived a sinless life. So he had the ability to be the sacrifice for us, and he was willing. He willingly drank the cup of God's wrath so that our sins could be paid for. Ultimately, as we talk about the Redeemer, it's pointing to the great Redeemer. But as we come back to the story, as Boaz is interacting with this guy who's the Redeemer, he starts to talk about it, and he talks about the terms. Hey, there's this field, and there's this woman, Naomi, and he's kind of leaning in, and he's like, yeah, this seems like it's a good thing. And then he says this in verse 5. It says, then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So he's like all in, and then he's not. Oh, hold on. I don't need me another wife. And I certainly don't need to give my resources so that someone else can have their name and their lineage perpetuated. I'm out. Yet Boaz does the opposite. Boaz does the opposite. He's willing to give up his own inheritance to raise up a name for someone who left his people to go someplace else, to not follow God. He's willing to do that because that's what redemption looks like. It looks like being a substitute. It looks like sacrificing. And then he redeems Ruth. He redeems Ruth. And they get married, and she conceives and has a child. In verse 13, we see that she conceives and she bears a son. And Naomi is like beside herself. Blessed be the Lord, she says, because everything has changed. Everything they were once at the beginning of the story, their stomachs were empty. Everything was barren, and now they're full again. Their bellies are full. Their life is full. Everything has changed. The camera pans out, right? In the story, it seems like we're going to ride off into the sunset. This is a wonderful end of the story. And yet, then we read at the end of the passage, we see a genealogy like, oh, and this is what happens. They don't just ride off into the sunset. We read a genealogy. I don't know about you, but the last rom-com I watched didn't have a genealogy at the end. It's just the couple, oh, it's going to be perfect. Their life will be free of any trial. But this is what it says in verse 18. It says, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Hey, we know that name. He married Rahab. Rahab the harlot. We remember about that last week? Salmon fathered Boaz. Boy, doesn't that change our view of Boaz? Boaz's mom was a part of another people. She gave up everything. She gave up everything because she heard about the God of the universe, and she didn't let her past inform how she was going to talk to her son about the amazing and mighty God. She told him about God's deliverance. She didn't let her past define her. She let God define her. And parents, we need to embrace that. We need to hold on to that because we've made mistakes. Maybe you've made mistakes in your parenting. Maybe you've made mistakes in your life. But our job is to be faithful to tell our kids about God. And to teach them how to brush their teeth and take a shower and do the practical things of life. Yes, we're supposed to do all of those things too. But we tell them about God. Don't feel like you can't do it because of your past. Because God can do it. Because apart from your abilities, God is going to put the Boazes and the Ruths of life into your family by his grace. And then it goes on, and Boaz fathered Obed, and Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. This story isn't ultimately about Naomi or Ruth or Boaz or even David, because this points to Jesus. Jesus, our Redeemer. God is writing a story bigger than us, one that ultimately it culminates in Jesus. Think about your story. Your story isn't even just about you. Your story is going to point to Jesus. And you're like, yeah, that person who's sitting next to me here this morning, their story points to Jesus. How many of you would agree that Emily's story points to Jesus? You heard her story. It points to Jesus. Yeah, everybody in her small group, they're in the back row. They're like, yep, I'll stand up with both hands. It points to Jesus. Your story points to Jesus. Because he's the Redeemer. He redeemed us at the cost of his life. He brings sinners into his family. He covers us with his righteousness. He restores us for eternity. Friends, in Christ, no loss is final. No story is over. No brokenness. No heart can be too broken or past is too foreign or bitterness beyond redemption. Your loss, your sin, your struggle, your abuse, it does not define your future. Your grief is not your destiny. God's writing a bigger story. The Redeemer is writing a bigger story. Now, as you consider this amazing story that we've walked through, where does your story intersect with this story? Perhaps you feel like Naomi, bitter, empty, confused by God's providence. You know, there was a hymn writer, his name's William Cowper. He, out of the depths of his own suffering, he wrote these words in a hymn. He said, "Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread." We don't talk like that now, but when you think about it, when the clouds are coming, you see the darkness of the clouds, and you're like, oh, I don't like the looks of that. And we feel that in our lives. We see some of the hard things coming, and sometimes we don't see them coming, then they just kind of show up like the storms that pop up out of nowhere around here, and they come like that, and other times you kind of see them coming, and you're just like, oh, I don't see them. We dread them. But this is what he says in the verse of the hymn, these clouds are you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. The storms always come with the rain that comes and gives life and refreshment and washes things clean. Now, I get the trials of our life don't feel like a long-awaited rainstorm. But in that hymn, William Cowper said, behind a frowning providence hides a smiling face. Maybe you're like Ruth, stepping into the unknown, trembling with fear. Maybe you are in the place where God's calling you in some way to be a redeemer, a restorer, someone who brings hope. That's not just speaking to the single men in the room that need to go marry somebody. It could. Because even in Emily's life and others' life, there are redeemers in our midst. I love that about you, that have come to be men of godliness to children who don't have a dad, or come along and bring provision. We come along and we represent the Redeemer, even if we're not the biological Redeemer that marries somebody. We come and we play that role in people's lives. Maybe God's calling you to that, calling you to be the hands and feet to someone in need. Our lives connect with this story in so many ways. But ultimately, this story's points us to Christ because Jesus is the true and better Boaz. He meets you in your loss with open arms and says, come to me when you're weary and heavy laden. He covers you with his wings and he protects you and guards you. He restores your life to his good plan. He's writing a new chapter in your life that your past grief cannot erase. God's hand is not against his children. God, his grace is at work even in the famine. Even his love is not shaken even in the midst of loss. Friends, your story is like Naomi's. Your story is like Ruth's. Find hope in the Redeemer. Find it fresh today and come to him and trust in him. Let Jesus restore your story. For some of us, that's just restoring our perspective to what is true, not something that is new. To some of us, that means we need to come to faith in Christ even this morning. We're going to be reminded right now of what Christ has done by taking communion together.